I'm sure innocents have been killed, and it's the price of waging a war. I think we should be incredibly careful. I think not we, Israelis should be incredibly careful to be sure that they're focusing on going after the folks that are propagating this war against Israel. And it's against their interest when that doesn't happen. But I have no confidence in the number that the Palestinians are using.
No confidence in the numbers the Palestinians are using. So as the civilian death toll in Gaza surpassed 7,000 people on October 25th, President Joe Biden suggested that Israel and the American people should be skeptical of the numbers and argued that the source of this information, the Palestinian Health Ministry, cannot be trusted. Biden, along with the far-right Israeli government that is carrying out the atrocities in Gaza, argue that the health ministry is controlled by terrorist group Hamas, and as a result, the numbers are likely inflated. Now, never mind the fact that Biden's own State Department has cited the casualty figures put out by the Palestinian Health Ministry. HuffPost reviewed nearly 20 State Department situation reports starting on October 8th, which of course was the day after Hamas carried out its brutal and devastating terrorist attacks against Israeli civilians. And that killed 1,400 people. As HuffPost makes clear, these situation reports represent US assessments from the ground that inform policy decisions and decision making in Washington. In other words, the State Department not only cites these very figures that include insanely high civilian casualties, they make policy decisions that result in the United States greenlighting what Israel is currently doing. HuffPost analysis found the following. In at least 12 instances, US embassy officials attributed the number of Palestinian casualties to the Hamas-linked health ministry in Gaza, including in the report provided to State Department colleagues on October 25th, just hours before Biden's remarks. In one instance in which a situation report questioned the accuracy of figures from the Gaza ministry on October 21st, the American official drafting the note wrote of the number of Gazans killed or injured the previous day. The numbers are likely much higher, according to the UN and NGOs reporting on the situation. So there's good reason why the State Department cites and relies on these numbers. Historically speaking, they've been relatively accurate. Toby Fricker, the United Nations, who's with the United Nations Children's Fund, spoke to German outlet Deutsche Welle, DW, to make the case. And before we go to his video, keep in mind that Catherine Russell, who's the head of UNICEF, says that more than 3,000 children have already been killed in just 3 weeks, with another 400 children dying every single day in Gaza. Now, with that in mind, let's hear what another UNICEF official has to say.
The numbers of children killed, the numbers of children injured inside the Gaza Strip are extraordinary. Now, these numbers come from the Palestinian Ministry of Health. And UNICEF also has our own sources on the ground. We have staff on the ground, partners on the ground to look into the numbers, as we always do. And I'd just say that in past, like in 2014, for example, when there was an escalation, the UN then verifies numbers. We can't do that in real time, of course, for obvious reasons, but we verify numbers. And when we've done that before in similar situations, not at this scale, the numbers have been very, very similar.
And it's not just UNICEF that's pushing back on Biden's regurgitated IDF talking points either. The Associated Press noted that the Ministry of Health's figures from previous conflicts have broadly matched the numbers arrived at both the Israeli government and the United Nations. And the State Department itself has long considered the numbers reliable, which really does beg the question, why did Biden lie to us? But let me continue. The Gaza Ministry of Health responded by publishing a list of names of 6,747 people who had died as of October 26th since the bombing campaign began, including 2,664 children. The list included 2,665 children, but the Intercept found that one 14-year-old boy was listed twice, bringing its total down to 6,746. Otherwise, the list does not contain duplicates. And look, even though there were names provided, apparently that was not good enough for John Kirby. That's Biden's National Security Council coordinator for strategic communication, even though his strategic communication sucks balls. He made this shameful statement during a press conference following the release of the list of names. Take a look.
Well, we all know that the Gaza Ministry of Health is just a front for Hamas. It's run by Hamas, a terrorist organization. I've said it myself up here. We can't take anything coming out of Hamas, including the so-called Ministry of Health, at face value. What we're saying is that we shouldn't rely on numbers put forth by Hamas and the Ministry of Health.
So they say it's more than 7,000. Is there any way to assess how many it is? I mean, the president said it was a pretty dramatic moment when he said, "Yeah, we don't have any confidence in that." We respect that you can't take Hamas at its word, but it does appear by all independent journalism, including that by a lot of people in the room, that thousands of Palestinians have been killed.
We would not dispute that.
Does the president have faith in the numbers released by the West Bank Ministry of Health, which is run by Palestinian authorities, that says there's been more than 100 West Bank Palestinians killed by what President called extremist settlers?
I know of no dispute with the rough numbers coming out of there either. We know that there's been quite a bit of violence in the West Bank as well. Obviously, the casualties are nowhere near the numbers that we're seeing coming out of Gaza.
And just today, Kirby was actually confronted by a reporter who lost members of his own family in the war. Take a look at this.
Thousands of Palestinian civilians have fallen so far, including 160 of my own relatives. And I'm just wondering, how many Palestinian civilians need to be killed before the United States calls for a ceasefire?
First of all, my condolences to you and your family. Are you in touch with some?
Well,
that are
as much as I can.
Not as much as you'd like to be, yeah. But I'm very sorry to hear that. I'm very sorry to hear that. And so I can see this is obviously personal for you. In terms of a ceasefire, our concern with that is that Hamas benefits.
Just go right back to regurgitating your talking points after a reporter disclosed to the world that 160 of his own family members gone, dead, wiped out by the IDF. Okay, are you able to be in touch with, Kirby realized halfway through his response, you probably aren't able to get in touch with 160 of your family members who have died as a result of the IDF's brutality in Gaza, which has complete disregard for the lives of innocent civilians. And by the way, Kirby isn't just ignoring the sound analysis of humanitarian groups that are on the ground, who tend to corroborate the numbers reported by the Palestinian Ministry of Health. He also decides to discredit journalists who have done their own analysis. Ryan Grimm and Prem Thacker at the Intercept took a look at the list of names released by the health ministry, and here's what they found. Prior to the release of the list, Maram al-Dada, a Palestinian who was born and raised in Gaza but now lives in Orlando, Florida, had told the Intercept about the deaths of 7 relatives on his father's side of the family and 30 on his mother's side, and in and around Khan Yunis. Now, a week later, the number had risen to 46 total. The Intercept then went on and compared the list of his relatives to the list released by the Palestinian Health Ministry. The list of those killed includes 4 different last names, 30 members of one branch of the family, 9 from another, 4 from a third, and 3 from a fourth. Of those 46 members of al-Dada's family so far lost in the war, 43 appear on the list, from the littlest, a baby girl not yet 1, to the oldest, a 71-year-old grandmother. In other words, the list put out by the health ministry was an undercount, not an overcount, not an inflation of civilian deaths. These numbers and the details of the victims are so brutal and difficult to stomach. Entire families are being wiped out, and this brutality is being shrugged off by the West as mere collateral damage. It was disgusting when the US State Department referred to civilian deaths that way in our Middle East wars, and Israel really shouldn't be held to a lower standard. Unlike Biden or Kirby, there are some who have enough of a conscience to stand against what the IDF is carrying out. A top United Nations official in New York has just resigned, arguing that the UN is failing to address what he calls a textbook case of genocide.
Craig McIver is a longtime international human rights lawyer who served as director of the New York office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. He'd worked at the United Nations since 1992 and lived in Gaza in the 1990s. In a letter addressed to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, Craig McIver wrote, "In Gaza, civilian homes, schools, churches, mosques, and medical institutions are wantonly attacked as thousands of civilians are massacred. In the West Bank, including occupied Jerusalem, homes are seized and reassigned based entirely on race, and violent settler pogroms are accompanied by Israeli military units. Across the land, apartheid rules." Craig McIver went on to write, "What's more, the governments of the United States, the United Kingdom, and much of Europe are wholly complicit in the horrific assault."
And I feel a great deal of shame that we are, that the United States, in the name of the American people, has provided blanket immunity to Israel. Impunity, they can do whatever they want. There is no red line. There is nothing they can do that can convince the Biden administration to basically demand a ceasefire, reconsider the strategy of just indiscriminately bombing. Now, the UN official who quit is not the only one who's had issues with the United States and its handling of this war. After the Israeli Defense Forces took responsibility for bombing the Jabalia refugee camp, which killed at least 50 innocent people and injured hundreds of others, Bolivia cut diplomatic ties with Israel. In addition to dissolving diplomatic ties, Maria Nela Prada, minister of the Bolivian presidency, said Bolivia's government demands the end of attacks in the Gaza Strip, which have so far led to thousands of civilian deaths and the forced displacement of Palestinian people. Now, Israel responded, to be honest, the way you'd expect them to, by essentially accusing Bolivia of siding with Hamas, which is a common tactic Netanyahu's right-wing government uses to silence anyone who has any issue with the slaughter of civilians. They write that the government of Bolivia's decision to cut diplomatic ties with Israel is a surrender to terrorism and to the Ayatollah's regime in Iran. By taking this step, the Bolivian government is aligning itself with the Hamas terrorist organization. It's just absolutely pathetic. Now, Israel remains undeterred. As long as they have the support of the United States, that's gonna be the case. So the IDF decided to bomb that same refugee camp again today after the outrageous initial airstrike. Chile and Colombia have decided to recall their ambassadors to Israel as a result. Obviously, the denialism surrounding the death toll is an admission. It's an admission that the flagrant disregard for human life, including the lives of literal children, is an outrageous violation of international law and deeply immoral. And while it is perfectly justified for Israel to hunt down the terrorists who raped, kidnapped, maimed, and murdered innocent Israeli civilians on October 7th, what the Israeli Defense Forces are currently doing goes way beyond that. Israel is not entitled to engage in the casual and brazen slaughter of thousands of innocent people. As of Tuesday, October 31st, at least 8,525 Palestinians have been killed and more than 21,543 injured. Israel is also not entitled to carrying out the displacement of literally millions of people. In the end, this will do nothing to keep Israelis safe. As foreign policy analyst and University of Miami visiting professor Rula Jabril notes here.
The military officials are saying today, and they've been saying for weeks, that they really don't see distinction between militia and militants and civilians. And this is the huge problem because it's creating mass radicalization around the Middle East and it's triggering actors like Iran and others, militias who are now declaring war not only on Israel but also on the United States, as we've seen yesterday from the militias, the Houthis in Yemen. You cannot kill your way to defeating an idea. You have to address the underlying causes that feeds that idea. Killing thousands and thousands of civilians strengthening that idea.
We need a ceasefire now. Anyone who calls for a ceasefire is not aligning with Hamas, is not supportive of terrorism, but rather supportive of keeping innocent civilians alive.
Hey, thanks for watching that video. We really appreciate it, guys. And we appreciate it if you become members, because that allows us to be independent, honest, progressive, all the things that you don't get from corporate media. And all of that is because of you guys. Hit the join button below and become one of us. Become a Young Turk.